this video, we're going to talk about the pocketing toolpath. So here in the top view, I have my polygon. It's grouped and closed. I'm going to change that to a perspective. Under machining, I have a 3-axis machine set up, my post processor set up, and my stock. If I turn stock on, you'll see it sitting there. I'm going to go to my tools and add a tool library. So this way I have some tools to work with. I'll close that window. I'm going to go to machining options, 2-axis, pocketing. The first thing it's going to ask me to do is select a containment region. So that's this button here. I'm going to select my polygon. Enter brings me back to this window. I'm going to go to the tools menu. I'm going to select a 1/4" end mill for MDF. Just by selecting it here, it adds it as the tool, and you can see all the parameters here for that tool coming from the file. Under feeds and speeds, it's already brought my feed rates in from my file, so I can use those or I can edit them directly here. Clearance plane is how far in the Z-axis is the tool going to move before it goes to jog movements. I like to use the max stock height plus a distance. 1/4" works well. It'll clear most of the screws. If you have large hold downs, you might want to bump this up. Sorting for this particular file, since I only have one polygon, it's not going to make any difference. But if I have multiple polygons that I was pocketing, the sort direction can have a big effect on cut time. Under advanced cut parameters, I'm not going to perform rounding cuts. Inside corners of this will be rounded naturally based on the diameter of the tool, so I don't need to add those. I'm going to change the cut arc fitting to perform arc fitting and change that to a lower number. In this particular file, since there are no arcs, it's not going to have any effect, but it's a good habit to get into. I also want to smooth the transitions between cuts. That gives me between the different cut levels. It'll cut those areas smoother and not give me any stair stepping. Under entry and exit, in the engage motion, we're going to leave it as path. That means it cuts along the first tool path at an angle. So it's cutting into the work at an angle, which is called ramping. It's a little easier on the tool, less stress on the tool, and produces a better cut. On the retract, it's going to do it in a linear fashion, but I want to do it at a 0 angle. That is straight up. This keeps it from running into any uncut stock. I want to apply this at all cut levels so that it ramps in, step down. Under cut levels, the first thing to pick is the location of the cut geometry. This has to reflect how you set up the stock and how you set up the physical machine. In this case, my stock is at the top of my box, so I want to select at top. Control depth is how far am I going to cut into the material. Total depth of cut is simply that. I'm going to cut a 1/2 inch deep. My roughing depth and finishing depth let me divide my total cut into 2 controllable zones. Roughing depth, I'm going to click on that. It's going to put the total depth in there, and then I can go to finishing depth, and as I add finishing depth, it's going to take off roughing depth. These two numbers will always add up to total depth of cut. Now, once I have set those, I can control for the roughing depth how much to cut per tool path. In this case, it's going to try to cut 400 thousandths in one shot, which is way too much for a little 1/4" cutter, but I'm going to set that at 200 thousandths, which means it's going to make 2 passes to make the 400 thousandths up. If these numbers don't equally divide out, it's going to make a last roughing pass at kind of the leftover amount. So I tend to make these kind of match. Finishing depth gives me a second zone, and by default it's going to come in here at the full depth of 100 thousandths, and I could select this at, say, 50 thousandths, and that would force it to do 2 finishing passes, or I could leave it with a 1/4" cutter. I could leave it at 100 thousandths and it would cut fine, but we'll leave it at 50 thousandths for now. Cut level ordering, this is important if you have multiple polygons. Again, depth first is the preferred. It's a much faster cut time. Under cut parameters, tolerance is how close to the line do you want the tool path to maintain itself. Stock is how much stock to remain. In other words, do you want me to leave some stock material? This is important if you're going to be sanding the part, filing it, or do something to hand remove some material. You want some there to take off to get the surface finish better, that type of thing. I typically set this to 0. The cut pattern is how do you want me to move the tool to clear this inner area. Our pocket. If we look here in the blue little highlighted lines, this is the offset pattern: offset spiral, linear, circular, and radial. For parts that are just round, circular works a little better. If a part is very long, linear works a little better for it. Cut direction, I always want to go with climb, and I want to make sure I set this to offset. Climb. Start point is inside the polygon. Step over distance is how much do you want me to overlap the cuts when I'm clearing this area. 70% is the ideal, but what you're going to find in a lot of tool paths is 70%, because that's a very large overlap. If the remaining material in the cut is smaller than the overlap size, it won't cut it. It'll leave that tool path uncut for that area. So you kind of have to balance those. 25% is the minimum I would ever go. Under that, it's really causing too much stress on the tool. I'm going to try this at 60% and see if I get clean borders all the way around. I always want to keep the tool down. That keeps it from removing back clearance plane between each cut level, so that can shave off some time of your cut. Hit generate. Then notice here under setup, I've got that first tool path. I'm going to go to simulate. With the tool path highlighted, I'm going to hit play, and there you can see it cutting out. If I rotate this, it looks pretty good. It's leaving that little island in the middle. So if we open this, here's all the pieces that we set before, so we can go back and change. We're going to go to parameters, and I'm going to switch this down to 55% and generate again. Go back to my simulation. And now notice with 55%, it's not leaving that little stud in the middle. So that's a way I can go back and change parameters if my simulation doesn't look good.